Hi, welcome to our first podcast of You Can Do This about living well with COPD and other chronic lung diseases. The name of our podcast today is Happy New Year. I'm Jane Martin, a respiratory therapist, educator, writer, and author. And I've spent much of the last 35 plus years listening to, learning from, and writing about people with COPD and other chronic lung diseases. Each week here on the podcast, we'll have a special guest, a person living with COPD or another chronic lung disease. Today, we're so glad to have with us Bob Giffen, and we'll be hearing more from Bob in a little while, but first, let's talk about you. When you've been diagnosed with COPD, there's a lot to learn. You may face a lot of changes, and it can be really overwhelming. But you know the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So, in this new year, in this podcast each week, we'll talk about and learn about just a little bit at a time what you need to do to get on your way to living a full life with COPD or other chronic lung disease. Each podcast will correspond with one chapter in my book, Live Your Life with COPD 52 Weeks of Health, Happiness, and Hope, which also covers one aspect of living with chronic lung disease each week. The information in this podcast will not be exactly the same as that in the book, although there will be some overlaps, but it'll be another way to learn some of this information. I started working at the hospital in respiratory care in the early 80s and treated a lot of people with COPD who were coming in again and again and again because they didn't know what to do at home to take care of their COPD to keep these bad episodes from happening. I knew there just had to be a solution. So I started talking with patients when I was up there helping them with their breathing treatment, when they were patients in the hospital, telling them about how to prevent some flare-ups, bad episodes of their breathing, and how they could stay out of the hospital, or at least make their episodes less serious. After a while, I established a breathing support group. And then later on, I started a pulmonary rehab program to help people with COPD learn what they needed to know to stay well and breathe easier and stay out of the hospital. Sometimes, and understandably so, uh, these folks would become really discouraged, wondering if they were ever going to breathe better and feel better. But we just kept at it. We kept talking. We kept learning. And I would say, you know what? You can do this. I know you can. You're smart enough to understand this stuff, and you can manage your COPD, another chronic lung disease. So many of these folks not only survived, but thrived with their COPD. And then I started writing their stories. When I was writing the stories of people with COPD and other chronic lung disease, I met a lady named Jo Von Tucker. Jo Von Tucker was a lady who lived in New York City. She had been a very successful businesswoman. She was 52 years old, and she was diagnosed with COPD and told that from then on, she was going to be on oxygen 24/7. The doctor said, you're going to live for 2 years, maybe 5 years at the most. And after she went home and cried a bit and recovered from hearing this diagnosis, she thought, no, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to get a hold of this thing. So she went to the library in New York City to find out about COPD. And this was like in 1989. So there really was hardly any information about COPD. But she was undaunted. She got a hold of some experts and basically taught herself a lot about COPD. She went on to advocate and to write and to organize people with COPD and other chronic lung diseases so they could lead the best life possible. She did end up dying 14 years later, and it wasn't caused by COPD. It was caused by complications following surgery. So she beat the odds. She did it. And you can do it too. I'm just going to read a little bit out of my book, a little excerpt of Jovan's words in the first chapter, Happy New Year. And so Jovan Tucker said, a new year has begun, and with it, another opportunity to take control of our breathing and our lives with COPD. Our doctors can guide us, direct us, and measure our pulmonary function. Our families can encourage and inspire us to be faithful with our regular exercise routine, take our medicines, and get the nutrition we need. Our respiratory therapists can teach us proper breathing techniques and help us learn how to work our supplemental oxygen if we have it, and our respiratory equipment. Many people can be of help as we fight against COPD, but they can't do it for us. They cannot take our medicines for us, they can't exercise for us, and they certainly cannot breathe for us. We are the ones who must be responsible for our health management. So, you and me, let's make our New Year's resolutions right now to commit ourselves to whatever it takes to take control of our breathing and our lives. We can do it. Now is the time. Maybe you were diagnosed with COPD or another chronic lung disease yesterday, or maybe many years ago. So my question to Bob is it possible to learn what you need to know about managing your COPD or other chronic lung disease? Is it really possible to have an active life and to avoid being sick and to take charge of your health in this new year? So let's turn to Bob and see what he thinks of this and how he did it.
Yeah, it can be a challenge at first to accept a COPD. And you have to kind of own your illness and face up to it before you can really learn about it and find out what kind of limitations it places on you and how to go about getting your life back. Kind of look for tools and processes that can help. Try to avoid crowds, wash your hands. It's pretty important to avoid getting bugs, especially when my grandkids are around. I had to be more conscious of my nutrition and eating healthy foods and making sure I drink enough water is a big issue for me. Gotten used to using scooters, mobility carts when I go to the store so I can get around and get things that I need, be more active, spend more time with my grandkids, with my wife, walking the dogs. And I think for a time before I started using them, I spent a lot of time inside, just kind of shut in, not getting around and participating as much. And then talking to other people who have the disease. My sister also has it. And we talk quite a bit about things that work for us. And she's been pretty proactive. She's had a lot of things done. She had a lung reduction surgery and really helped her a lot.
So, yeah, thanks, Bob. You talked a little bit about the practical things you do, getting around. Can you tell us just a little bit about how you coped emotionally when you were first told you had COPD? How did you get from there to the point you're at right now, where you're really in control of your life and you're managing things?
It can be pretty disheartening. I'm sure I went through periods of being depressed and just kind of getting down, why me? But just kind of facing up to the fact that I had it, get to a point where I can move forward and accept what it was and find ways that would help me.
Any other thoughts, Bob, before we go on?
No, I just want to say that the book really did help me. It gave me some guidelines, and I would definitely recommend it to anybody.
Thanks so much for being our guest today and for sharing your story and your tips and your experience. We're at the close almost of our first podcast. I'm going to leave you today with our key points. And at the end of every chapter in my book, Live Your Life with COPD, 52 Weeks of Health, Happiness, and Hope, there's something called Your Turn. And, you read the chapter and you get the information, but then at the end, it's like, okay, your turn. How are you going to use this information and what are you going to do? One of the pieces in Your Turn is key points. And I know sometimes how hard it is to remember things. If you don't remember anything else from this chapter, remember these things. So this chapter's got 3 key points. Number 1, now is the time to make a fresh start. 2, it is possible to take charge of your own health. And number 3, you can be in control of your breathing and your life. I hope to see you again next week when we talk about pulmonary function testing. So remember, being diagnosed with COPD is not a death sentence, and you're not alone. You can do this. So we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.